This is the Less Insurance Dependence podcast show with my good friend Gary Takis and myself, Narain Arulraja.
We appreciate your listenership, your time, and most of all, we appreciate your intention to reduce insurance dependence in your practice. Our goal is to provide information that will help you successfully reduce insurance dependence and convert your practice into a thriving and profitable dental practice that provides you with personal, professional, and financial satisfaction. Welcome to another episode of the Less Insurance Dependence podcast. I'm Gary Takis, your podcast co-host. Most of you know that the Less Insurance Dependence podcast is the official podcast of RIDA, the Reducing Insurance Dependence Academy. If you'd like more information about RIDA, go to rid.academy. We have an upcoming summit coming up soon after this episode is published. It's coming up in November. It's 6 hours of Focus CE, all about helping you do all the necessary things to successfully drop PPO plans. Well, one quick announcement, and then we'll get into today's topic. By the way, today's topic of the episode, title of the episode is, Can I have a hygiene-driven practice if I am a PPO office? By the way, that question was submitted by one of our listeners, and we thought it would make a great topic for a podcast episode. Before we get into that episode, let me make a quick announcement. Coming up on October 20th is our next masterclass. This masterclass, it's 3 hours, concentrated focus on one topic. And the topic is the $1,000 an hour dentist, the $1,000 an hour dentist. And during that masterclass, I will go over all the details of what it looks like to become a dentist that produces on average $1,000 an hour. By the way, that level of production for a dentist would fall in to the top 1%, the top 1%. So certainly it's a level that is very high performing, but I'd like to think, Naren, that all of our listeners in the Less Insurance Dependence podcast can get to the top 1%. In any case, that masterclass is October 20th, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern time. You'll get 3 hours of CE. If you'd like to register, by the way, very inexpensive. Tuition is less than $100. I think you'll find that's maybe the least expensive CE you can ever participate in. If you'd like to register, simply go to thrivingdentist.com/masterclass. If there's space available, be sure to register because those masterclasses do sell out. Even though it's a virtual class live stream, they do sell out because we run it as more of a workshop than a lecture.
I love this topic, Gary. As you know, we run the group I Love Dentistry, and it has close to 9,500 members. And one of the sentiments I hear there is that hygiene is a loss leader, meaning I'm going to do 1/3 of my practice or 20%, depending on the size of your practice. And the bigger I grow that 20% or 30% of my practice, which is hygiene, the more money I lose. You know, as a student of business, just doesn't make any sense to me. It's almost like you don't want this thing to succeed because if it does, you're going to fail more as a business. So I love this topic, Gary.
Yeah, why in the world would you ever want to grow something in your business that you perceive as a loss leader?
Good question.
You essentially want to put a blanket over it and put it to sleep.
Exactly.
Because why would I want to have something in my business that loses money? And yet, sadly, many dentists truly believe that their hygiene department is a loss leader. Well, I couldn't be more opposite in my thinking than that. I think of hygiene as a practice driver. It's one of the key elements of a thriving practice. Think about that for a minute. The more activity you have in hygiene, the more activity, the better it is for the practice. Because first of all, let's think about it. Let's step outside of business for just a minute. The more active your hygiene department is, the better we are at producing results for our patients. We're helping our patients be healthier. We're helping them reduce future dental expenses by catching things earlier. And we're helping our patients become as healthy as possible. So how about that for an altruistic motivation? But also, the more hygiene appointments we have, it has a direct correlation to production on the doctor's schedule. Because many patients, through our hygiene exams, have treatment that they need or want that then show up on the doctor's schedule subsequently for production appointments. So the more hygiene activity we have, the busier and more productive our doctor's schedules are. So there's a direct correlation there. Dr. Reed taught me that. Omer said, Gary, this is in 1980. He said, Gary, I want you to always, I was literally green behind the ears. I was just getting started. And Omer said, Gary, I want you to always remember this. Hygiene is a critical element of a successful practice. It's a critical element. And he said it with such conviction that I knew what it meant intellectually, but I really didn't know what it meant in every facet. But he said it with such conviction. It's like, I wrote it down and I have remembered it. Well, I believe that even stronger now, 41 years later. That is more of a truism now than it was when I first learned it, for sure. So really, we need to shift the mindset, doctors, from loss leader to practice driver / profit center in your practice. Now, let's answer the question. Can I have a hygiene-driven practice if I'm a PPO office? Okay, I've got to answer that question because it was asked. And the answer is it's very difficult because of the fees that your hygiene department can generate in your practice. It's very, very difficult to have a hygiene-driven practice because of the absurdly low fees that you get from the PPO plans relative to your hygiene patients. So yes, it can be hygiene-driven, but the best thing that you can do is drop the PPO plans. And here's why. In a thriving practice, we want 1/3 of the total production of the office coming from the hygiene department. 1/3. 1/3. That what that does is that reduces the burden on the dentist or dentists to do all the production. That reduces it, and it makes a more balanced business, a more balanced practice. Now, your hygiene department can produce that in your UCR fees, but in terms of what they can actually collect, it's very low. And so you'll never get to 1/3 of collections in your office coming from hygiene. 1/3 of you might get to 1/3 of production, but you're not going to get to gross production, meaning our UCR fees. But right. You're never going to get to 1/3 of collections. Now let's add a dimension to it that makes it insult to injury. The dimension that I want to add is ever increasing hygiene wages.
Can you give us some examples, Gary, so that it kind of, because a lot of doctors are busy doing dentistry, they don't sit and do the math. So just want to understand the math a little bit.
Well, there's a simple math equation here. The simple math equation is how do we make hygiene a profit center? And the answer is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 goes to your hygienist. 1/3 of their collections goes to the hygienist to pay your hygienist as a producing team member.
Right.
1/3 goes to your related overhead, the room, the supplies, the equipment that you have, any support that's provided. Think we have, it's not, the hygienist doesn't do the job on her own. We have to have a hygiene scheduling coordinator that fills the schedule and someone that monitors and confirms and all of that. So 1/3 in the perfect world, 1/3 goes to your overhead related to your hygiene department.
Your office, your rent, your equipment, all of that stuff.
All of it. Your property taxes if you own your building. 1/3 of all your expenses. So 1/3 goes to that. And then the other third, the last third, so 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, the other third should be your profit from the hygiene department. By the way, what do I count as hygiene production? That's a very important qualifier. I count anything that happens with your hygiene patient with the exception of the doctor exam. The doctor exam gets credited to the doctor producer, but everything that happens. So whether the hygienist takes the x-rays or an assistant takes the x-rays, that goes to hygiene production. If we do any ancillary services like fluoride or sealants or whitening, that goes to hygiene production. Whatever happens to the hygiene patient in the hygiene appointment, with the exception of the doctor exam. So in the perfect world, a third, a third, a third. It's very simple math. You can check it out. And you can see how you're doing against that. And 1/3 goes to the hygienist, ideally. 1/3 goes to your overhead related to the hygienist, and then 1/3 goes to profit for you running that part of your business. However, in a PPO practice, you are never going to get there. In fact, in some cases, because of ever increasing hygiene wages are going up. All wages are going up in a post-COVID era. Hygiene wages are going up. In some cases, in some of the urban areas around the country, in San Francisco, in Seattle, in Chicago, in New York, in Miami, I've actually seen the hygiene wage per hour higher than the income that comes from a PPO patient, actually higher.
So let's assume, just so you pick some random numbers. So if the hygienist wanting to be paid $60 an hour, right?
Let's take a more of a nationwide, a number, and let's use $50 an hour, and that might be high. It could be high depending on where you're located. That could be very low depending on where you're located. But just use a round number of $50 an hour.
Right. So that means the hygienist is going to get paid 8 hours. So 50 times 8, 400. So we have to make at least $1,200 from her 8 hours of work to make it profitable.
Well,
so in other words,
a third goal.
Right.
And let's emphasize this: collect $1,200 a day.
Collect
$1,200 a day.
Right. So in other words, if you are with a PPO plan, after adjustments, after the insurance write-offs, you have to collect $1,200 from her 8 hours of work. So what you're saying is, most cases, if you're on a PPO plan, you are not going to be able to collect because of the steep discounts, the insurance write-offs.
I mean, look at what your profi fee is, your contracted profi fee. And some of them don't even pay the hygiene wage. So if you get the third, you're upside down. And then, in fact, your hygiene department is, in fact, the loss leader that you perceive it to be.
Right. It's like if you're living in projects and you only thing you see here is gunshots and people recruiting you to join a gang, it's really hard for you to get out of it. So here the math just doesn't work if you're on PPO plan. So now I understand why a lot of doctors, especially I guess the ones in PPO plans, say, hygiene is a loss driver because, that's their experience. That's their reality.
And then in turn, it is affecting the restorative side of the practice because you'll have fewer hygiene patients, fewer exams, fewer opportunity to move people along in their treatment plans in what they need or want, in terms of their treatment. And so it has a downward spiral effect. Remember the book Good to Great, where we talk about the flywheel effect. The flywheel effect is where you get a 5,000-pound flywheel. It's hard to get it moving, but once you get it moving, it moves on its own. It's once you get the momentum going. And so the flywheel effect on a hygiene-driven practice is when it's a third. That is a machine that just keeps moving. The opposite of it was the downward spiral. And it's a downward spiral if you're a PPO office. So, this was a long-winded way of saying, how do you solve this? Can I have a hygiene-driven practice in my PPO office? Very, very difficult to do that. Very difficult. I know of some, but there's consequences. Oftentimes they do a really extreme assisted hygiene model where they bring an assistant in and they start doing, seeing 16 patients a day instead of 8 patients a day. And if you look at that, then the math can be a little bit different. Now you're going to have some expenses associated with lending an assistant, but oftentimes the byproduct of that is lower quality care and lower quality interaction. The patient just feels like they got hustled in and out. Now, assisted hygiene can work, or modified assisted hygiene can work. Don't get me wrong on that. Modified assisted hygiene can work. But if you get it to work to the third model, you may end up with a hygiene department that you're not proud of, in terms of the quality of the product, not just the clinical care, but the experience. Patients start to feel like they were just hustled in and out. That's the opposite of what we want the experience to feel like. We want that patient to feel like that they got our undivided attention, that everything was, an outstanding experience, not just, sit down, shut up, and hang on. So, with that in mind, the answer to that question is it can be done, but it's very, very difficult. The better answer is to successfully drop PPO plans. And, we talked about RITA, the RITA summit coming up. RITA is an acronym. It's a play on words. We want to help you get RITA insurance. We know that's not grammatically correct. It does sound good. We want to help you get RITA insurance, but it's also an acronym, the Reducing Insurance Dependency Academy. So come join us for the summit and get on this train. If you're listening to this, we know you're interested in it, but there's a massive difference between education and implementation. Knowledge is great, but until you apply it, you don't get the benefit of that knowledge. So hopefully you're all understanding the importance and the importance of going out of network. But you got to take some action. Maybe it's time to get off the fence and really take some action.
Thank you, Gary. I really enjoyed this podcast. By the way, I'm going to read a review from one of our listeners, and I want to take a moment to appreciate you, Gary. So, I like listening to podcasts on my way to work, and this one has so much relevant information that I often pause and ask Siri to remember a piece of information for me. Very specific, relevant, helpful information that I would expect most consultants to charge me to get access to. Love this podcast. I think
Darren, thank you for sharing that. That certainly makes my day. And that was the concept behind the podcast, was to share useful information in a very convenient format. I love the way Doctor is using his or her commute time to be productive. That's very
I didn't know that you can ask Siri to remember things. I learned something new today.
There you go.
Now, as we come to a close, I want to take a moment to, go back to the announcement Gary made. The Thriving Dentist Masterclass, the $1,000 an hour dentist, it's going to be happening on the 20th of October. So literally next week. And we limit the seat, 3 hours of CE. And if you want to learn more, go to thrivingdentist.com/masterclass. If you love this podcast, you're going to love this masterclass because, Gary just gets to the point, explains things in a way that's so powerful that, the only thing you do is to implement the ideas he's sharing with you. So thank you so much, Gary. And I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We continue to have record weeks and record months in terms of how many countries we are getting listeners from, how many listeners, the wonderful reviews. If you love the podcast, please join the RIDA Association, Reducing Insurance Dependence.Academy, and it's free. The first year membership is on us. Join the summit on the 12th of November, and tell your friends. There is a huge movement, a group of people who have said enough is enough. We are going to create our own destinies. We are going to be our own masters. We are not going to be handcuffed by PPO plans. So come and join the journey and this transformation happening in dentistry all across the US.